Hello, cinefans. I'm Kendall Cruver, and this is Watching Classic Movies. The 6 films that Humphrey Bogart and director John Huston made together are among the best ever made in Hollywood's golden age. Bogart and Huston themselves are also endlessly fascinating, complex men. I spoke with Nat Segaloff about their work and their relationship, which he writes about in his new book, Bogart and Huston, their lives, their adventures, and the classic movies they made together. Welcome, Nat. It's so great to have you back again.
Hi, Kendall. It's great to be here. It's been a long time, and I'm so happy to be with you, especially.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I like our little annual meeting. I always say you're my most prolific guest. But the thing is, I see that in your books. You write so much that the books themselves show a honed writing craft. And you don't see that quite as much anymore. So I have to say, I really appreciate what you do. You've got this knowledge, but you're also a very fine writer.
A writer writes, and I started off in journalism, first doing radio for CBS News, and over the course of 4 years had to generate 2,000 pieces. And then I wrote for the Boston Herald, I've lost count, but at least 500 pieces. And when you have a deadline, you can't go out for a smoke. Even if I did, you
Right.
have to meet in broadcast, especially if you don't meet your deadline, it's dead air. So that's a
Yeah.
discipline that one gets into, and I've been able to keep that up by doing about 2 books a year.
It's impressive, but it's just kind of like the stewardship of a craft. It's showing respect by keeping it moving and adding to this skill. And I can see it. I can see it in your work. So I really
Thank you.
appreciate that.
I have a very
Yeah.
good agent in Lee Sobel who manages to sell this stuff. That's the
Yes.
other half of it, not just writing it, but getting it sold. So
Getting it out there and making a living at it, sure, which is not easy to do. So
these days, especially, I
yeah,
know.
yeah, yeah. You're blessed in that way. So this book, Houston and Bogart, I mean, I knew it wasn't going to be dull. I knew it wasn't going to be dull. And there's so many details, and I'm going to start with the most random one. You said something that it stuck in my head about how Bogart's head was large and it photographed well. And I have to tell you, I experienced that in person. This very random, but in the 80s, I was visiting Hollywood and we came upon the premiere of Dragnet, the one with Dan Aykroyd in it. So we stopped to watch the celebrities come out. We saw like, Peter Falk and all that. And some members of the cast ahead of the class came out, head of the class, huh? And I was like, my goodness, the melons on these people, they had enormous heads. Whoa, their heads are so big. And ever
Yeah.
since then, whenever I see a celebrity in person, it seems like most of the time the really photogenic ones have big heads. It's just thought it was funny. I've never heard anybody else say that.
I first noticed it when William Bast, who was a friend of James Dean and had written a book about him, happened to mention this. And he said there are 2 things that made James Dean a star. I mean, besides talent. And that
Yeah.
seems to be consistent among the people who are stars. One is they have slightly large heads. Now, we're not talking Mr. Potato Head here, where there's plenty of canvas to paint stuff, but there is something about them that kind of dominates. And the other thing is they tend to be nearsighted. And
Oh,
that's because the nearsighted people have to really concentrate and focus on the other actor they're talking to. And it almost a slightly cross eye, but it draws the viewer's attention to them in ways that people with normal sight don't really have.
that's
Curious, isn't it?
interesting. It makes me wonder about Teresa Wright. That's the first thing that popped in my head was the way she really paid attention. I wonder what her vision was like. Because it is somebody kind of leaning in and seeming almost like they don't see and they're trying to understand. You're so right. It's
The
really
eyes
interesting.
are not only the window to the soul, they're the thing that makes a movie star. And the camera has an unfailing ability to see right through the eyes into the brain and the heart and the soul. And that's something you notice if you watch the really great performers. All they have to do is just stand there, like Bogart, to dominate the scene. All Bogart has to do to dominate the scene is to enter it.
Yeah,
And your attention is drawn to him. Some people are just different.
right. And it's true. And it's something that, I mean, for some reason, particularly in Key Largo, I was looking at him, his face, his unusual face, and thinking this, almost feeling a disappointment in the way things are now. Because there's no way a man that looks like this. I mean, there's a few in there, and it's men, but such an unusual, lined, beautiful face, and how that adds to it. His charisma behind it is the thing that drives it home, and the other
Mhm.
elements we're talking about. But he is so physically fascinating.
Yeah, I think it was either Dashiell Hammett or F. Scott Fitzgerald, probably Hammett, who said by the age of 40, a man gets the face he deserves. And Bogart is clearly the epitome of that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Because you know he lived hard and you see it in the face, and that makes him interesting, right?
Yeah.
So that kind of leads me to Lauren Bacall, who is also interesting that way, and had the strength to go on for longer. Now, it's in the opening, in the introduction to your book, she wasn't all that fond of you because you did meet her.
I was
What?
with her for 5 or 6 weeks during the summer of 1987 in Newport, Rhode Island, when
Yeah.
she was in a film that John Huston was supposed to appear in, but he was too sick to do, that his son Danny directed, called Mr. North. Yeah, she was a handful.
So what was it? Does she have a feeling about journalists? Is it something like that?
Well, there's a couple of things. One, she was married to Bogart, whom the press adored, but she really had to put up with him and his escapades. And then later, she was married to Jason Robards Jr.,
Oh
who was
gosh.
also a drinker, and she had that to put up with too. I mean, she was one hell of a woman and very strong, but also, she was a glamour girl from the 1940s on. And Hollywood, as we know from the movie Sunset Boulevard, does terrible things to the human spirit. She had to
Yeah.
fend off the press. She had to deal with the gossip. And also, you remember in 1947, when she and Bogart had been part of the Committee for the First Amendment trying to defend the Hollywood 10 by appearing at the HUAC hearings in October of that year in Washington, she and Bogart recanted afterwards when they were accused of communist sympathies and uh, possibly threatened with being blacklisted. So she was very wary of the press because they, kind of discovered what was going on. So for years and years, she wanted her privacy. And my God, she knew how to get it. Now, she may not have liked me, but I got to say, she was remarkable. If I'd gotten her trust, and I don't think I ever did, she
Yeah.
would have known that nothing bad would ever appear. But she was a damn movie star, is what she
Hmm.
was. And you knew it.
I mean, I got the feeling it wasn't personal. It
No.
really did seem like a general feeling about, that's why it hit me like, oh, she's being very honest also in a way that probably a lot of stars weren't. I'm sure that there are many who felt that way and never showed it. And I really kind of thought there was something to that she didn't need to pretend.
There was a night shoot. One of the people in the film was Christopher Lawford, Peter Lawford's son, who had well-known substance abuse problems before then. And I was trying to interview him and just hang out because I was on the set every single day for this shoot. And, I had to keep a certain distance and also a certain intimacy. I was just shooting the bull with Chris. And Bacall came in and just sort of sat behind us and tried to censor our conversation, which was just talking, normal Hollywood stuff. So she was very protective, which was a very good thing because certainly she had to raise Bogart's kids and, it was
Right.
really looking out for their welfare. So I have no complaints.
Right.
Besides, it's given me 10 minutes of stories right here.
Right, right. And I mean I told you I think at some point that I would be honored that if she even knew I existed. Like I would love for her to be
Yeah.
not sure about me. But I also just think that there's nobody who spoke with better insight about Bogart and Houston. She really seemed to understand the relationship.
You did. And she had the chance to write about it in a book, which gave her a chance to really refine it. Bacall was remarkable, though. She really had enormous perception. She was a fine actress, and she was also a great star. I mean, it's a hell of a combination.
Yeah, there was something she said about John Huston that I think it just came out in general that John Huston, a word to describe him would be bored.
It's probably true. Probably
Yeah,
true. Houston was ahead of everything. They were Bogart and Houston were such different people. Bogart, who was raised well-to-do on the Upper West Side of New York, son of a doctor and an artist, was literally to the manor born. They had a great time, although both parents were deeply troubled. And he was more comfortable in a lounge or in a bar. Houston was comfortable anywhere else in the world. And so when they came together to make their films, it was really Bogart condescending to be abused by John Huston for the duration of the shoot, whether it was in a soundstage or more appropriately in the deserts of Mexico or in the wilds of the Congo River. But Bogart put up with it because he knew that Huston was the best director he'd ever worked with. And Huston put up with Bogart because he knew that Bogart was the reason, as the most bankable star in the industry, that Huston could get the budget to make his movies.
So that just leads me to what word would you use to characterize the relationship then? Was it mutual, one's tolerating and one's drawing energy? I mean, what did they give to each other then?
You were about to say mutually abusive, weren't you?
It feels a little bit that way because I know that John Huston is kind of inherently an abusive person, was.
Yeah, he very much was. He was a prick, but he was also a great director, and this is the difference between the artist and the man.
Right.
Uh, Bogart wasn't a prick, but he pretended he was. I think it was Mike Romanoff who said after 3 drinks, the problem with Humphrey Bogart is he thinks he's Humphrey Bogart. But there was certainly a relationship between them where each man knew that the other was good for him. But getting to that point was the challenge, and I think they did it through 6 films, more so in the first 5. The last being Beat the Devil, where nobody knew what was going on. But these are classic. I mean, Maltese Falcon, African Queen, Treasure Sierra Madre, Key Largo. Who can claim that on their resume but these 2 guys?
The thing that gets me is like this isn't even everything enormously classic about their work. I mean, there's other huge classics outside of their collaboration. You've got like Asphalt Jungle on one side, you've got Casablanca on the other. And
Yeah.
almost all of these, well, like, okay, Maltese Falcon, The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, Key Largo, African Queen, those are huge classics, things that you would have a new classic film fan watch. And then Across the Pacific and Beat the Devil, aren't in the same league, but they're very fun to watch. And you get the chance to watch these people that are just fun to spend time with. It's just fun to watch them interact with each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it. I mean, Across the Pacific, which was a kind of a portmanteau film, if you will, they tried to recapture the spirit of Casablanca with Sidney Greenstreet and Humphrey Bogart and Mary Astor and Peter Lorre. Well, it's a long story about that, but they tried to spontaneous, and you can't. I mean, you can't recapture Casablanca any more than you can recapture the creation. It's something that amazingly happened. But also, as is well known, John Huston left the production midway through because he'd been enlisted in the army and had to go off to the Signal Corps in World War II. So he turned the directing over to another director. And the legend is that he contrived to have Bogart, who was playing a double agent, be strapped to a chair and having the Japanese all about to execute him. Then he told the new director, Vincent Sherman, "Well, I'm out of here to fight the war. Goodbye." But what actually happened was Huston got together with the replacement director before then, and they scripted what was going to happen, but they invented a good story, and they just did enough reshoots to make it work. But it's interesting that both those people and Hollywood itself has kind of kept the story going over these years because it's much better than just saying they had 2 days of reshoots.
Yeah.
That's the kind of spirit you don't have today. You don't have people making up stories just to make the film more interesting. It's just the whole atmosphere has changed.
Yeah, just that feeling of messy people because they have character are not living, as opposed to messy people going against their human nature to make this fake facade. I mean, it's not fun messy anymore.
Yeah, it's all so much money involved. If you hiccup on a set, it costs somebody $10,000.
Yeah.
In those
Yeah.
days, the film could be made for under $1 million because everybody was under contract, and they had a common enemy, which was Jack Warner. And anything they could do to flummox Jack Warner was valued by all people involved. And Warner was canny enough to know that these people were trying to get his goat, but he let them because he knew they had talent. It was a different kind of symbiosis.
Yeah. I mean, well, just the fact that the studio head is this character that's interesting and not, you know, this kind of sociopath in a flannel vest,
That's true. That's true. You find there's a whole chapter in Bogart and Huston about the ornery Jack Warner and how,
Yeah.
difficult as he was, he loved movies. You're not
Yes.
going to find that in Hollywood today. People love deals, not movies. And he
Yeah.
also, I'll tell you, I was researching a film 20 some years ago, and I had access to the Warner Brothers Library, which is at USC. And you hear stories today about agents and managers and stars taking forever to get a deal on a film. Well, this was a film called Bonnie and Clyde, and that's because I was doing the book on Arthur Penn. And I looked up the production contract. The contract is 16 pages long. That's all. And it said, this is what the budget's going to be. This is how much money the film will have to make before everybody gets a percentage. And that was it. 16 pages. Now you're lucky if you get 160 pages and it looks like the national budget.
Yeah. And you can see it in the quality because the feeling that you're just playing is what makes a fun film good. I mean, something like Beat the Devil, it's like, maybe I'm only really giving this half my attention, but it's just like it feels like nothing's at stake. I mean, it's actually life and death. The literal plot is more of a life and death kind of
Yeah.
thing, but it seems like nothing is at stake. And they're just like seem to literally be amused by each other. Like you wonder if they're how much is acting. You're looking at Peter Lorre. He looks like he's going to start laughing or something.
The German Peter Lorre playing a guy with an Irish name for starters. But that's all. I mean, even though Bogart had some of his own money in it because that's the only way they could get the film financed, I guess they maybe eventually came out. But it's one of those films. I call it a shaggy dog film where you really can't follow it, but who cares? They're having so much fun along the way. It's almost like the people in the movie have already seen the movie,
Hmm.
and then they're just waiting for it to be over.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Very
Just
beat the devil. It's on the copyright lapsed, so it's on YouTube all over the place.
yes, a very accessible one. Well, most of these are though. That's one lovely thing about this. It was pretty easy to see everything. And I was looking at it and I was just trying to find because their partnership was so dedicated. I was trying to find a characteristic across them that define them. And I don't I mean a little bit of that feeling of character and camaraderie is part of it. But is there any one characteristic that you find across it that's evident to you after watching them and thinking about them so much?
Single malt scotch, maybe.
Really, just that,
But I
just
don't
like,
know.
let's just tie one on and make a film kind of a thing?
Well, opposites attract, but Bogart
Yeah.
and Huston got to know each other over drinks. Huston was the writer on a film called uh, High Sierra, which Bogart starred in, that Raoul Walsh directed so
Right.
brilliantly. And while they were at the studio doing, I guess, some of the interiors, Huston started hanging around the set because he wanted to learn how to direct, and who better to teach him than Raoul Walsh? While he was there, Bogart met him, and they went out drinking in a country club during lunch, and they just got to know each other over cocktails. So that's how it was done. But it was all, a family as well as a fiefdom at those studios in those days.
So which one of the six do you think most characterizes their relationship?
Well, I would say it was probably Treasure Sierra Madre because that was the one that was an ordeal for everybody. I mean, as Lauren Bacall said, you can be sure if it's a John Huston film, it's going to be shot in a horrible location. And that was certainly one of them. Not only the deserts of Mexico and in Yuma for some pickup shots, but just under the enormous pressure of the budget running over and trying to get the film done. Fortunately, Jack Warner was on board for it, as was the brilliant producer Henry Blanke. So I think Treasure Sierra Madre is the one that characterizes both men. Although I still think Maltese Falcon is more fun to watch.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think that's the one that I could watch. Like, just in the process of reading the book, I was watching the films, and that's the one I watched again. And how many times had I seen it? And I still felt compelled to I gotta see it again. And I just there's something about how the movie turns into a song, and Casablanca did this too. I think
Uh,
Notorious does it where it turns into a song, so you're just playing it over and over like you might play a song in the car, sort of a thing.
You mentioned three movies, which I call living room movies,
Yeah.
which doesn't apply anymore because nobody watches movies in the living room anymore. But it's one of those things where if it happens to be on TCM and you're walking through the living room, you sit there on the couch and you can let the stew boil over. You're watching the movie and nothing
Yeah.
distracts.
Yeah.
Uh, Other movies, I mean, Dave or A Few Good Men. I mean, some movies are like that. You just are riveted because they're magnetic to you.
Yeah, this joke people have about the dad standing and just staring at the TV. I'm like, oh, I'm that dad. If it comes up and I'll just watch it. And I mean, I guess that's very much a characteristic of classics too. So I have to mention that you did very, very late in Houston's life briefly meet him. I mean, what was that experience like?
In the summer of 1987, I was seconded to the production company of Mr. North, which was based on the book Oliver North by Thornton Wilder, his last novel. And John Huston had adapted it with Janet Roach, with whom he previously worked on Fritzi's Honor, and was in Newport, Rhode Island for the summer to be with his son Danny, whom he had assembled a cast for, and he was supposed to appear in the film. He was deemed too sick because he had emphysema quite advanced, and so Robert Mitchum filled in for him in this supporting role. And it was quite a gaggle of people, not only Robert Mitchum and Lauren Bacall, but also Harry Dean Stanton, Mary Stuart Masterson, Anthony Edwards. I mean, everybody, Catherine Houghton, David Warner, Mark Metcalf, anybody you can mention was there for a couple of days to make a cameo appearance. And right before the film started, Ernie Anderson, the film's unit publicist, who had arranged with the Boston Herald for me to write a story every day from the set and have total exclusive access to it, brought me to Huston's cottage where he was holding court, a poker game with Roberto Silva, his editor, Stephen Haft, one of the producers, Harry Dean Stanton, and Huston. We distracted him from the game long enough for him to shake my hand, but it wasn't an interview. It was just a formal greeting. And he
Yeah.
gave his patrician smile and his, hello, how are you? It turned out, although it wasn't an interview, I was apparently the last press person to get to him because also living with him was his companion, Maricela Hernandez, and it was in her arms that he died several weeks later. So I had the exclusive access, and I broke all the stories around the world about John Huston's death, and had the last interviews with people and all that. It was unhappy, even though I made the front page of many newspapers, because that isn't the kind of story you want to write. But I got
Yeah.
another book out of it called Mr. Huston, Mr. North, Life, Death, and Making John Huston's Last Film, which was brought up by Bear Manor Media just a couple of years ago. I put everything together and wrote the backstories and turned it into a book about literally. Oh, and I forgot Angelica Houston was there too to talk about
Oh
goddesses.
gosh.
And everybody couldn't have been nicer. But it was a very sad time because even though he died, they had to keep making the movie because they had the budget and they had the schedule. So Danny emerges. He's now a fine actor, but at the time he was directing and emerges as one of the bravest people I've ever met. And Angel too.
It's interesting. I mean, it couldn't have been easy being the offspring of John Huston. It almost feels like the gift he gave them of their careers in some respects. I mean, they worked for it. I'm not saying they didn't, but the things that he gave them is almost his apology to them. I don't know if it's intentional, but it kind of comes off that way. Like, here's the compensation, and all he could offer in some respects.
I can't really put my finger on it, Kendall, but he was a singular man and a great talent. And these are things that pull them out of the realm of any understanding that I have.
That's a good point, and I think that's why we still talk about Houston because there's always just this feeling of wondering and knowing in some respect that you're never going to get to the bottom of it. And I mean that brings me to Bogart, who the more I read about him, the more I realize I had him wrong. I think for a very long time I did have him connected to a screen image, even though there's plenty of variety in his roles. I think I saw him as much more tough and more of a hardened person, but I don't know that I feel that way now. Like, what is your take on Bogart after all of this research?
It took him a long time to get used to the idea that acting was a noble profession. And there's a wonderful, wonderful biography of Bogart that was begun by Anne Sperber and finished by Eric Lax when Anne died, called Bogart, that fills in a lot of the blanks and does immense amount of research. And I was fortunate to know both of these authors, so I was able to mine their book for just a piece here and a piece there, because the book is about Huston and Bogart together, not really singly. And there's a mystery to Bogart, as there is in all great actors, as to why he did this. I think he enjoyed acting, but he also enjoyed taking the mickey out of people. So he used his position, I think, as a star to not be a star, but to make sure that nobody else could be a star either. And I don't mean competitively. I mean if it was somebody at a party and they could make a wisecrack about him, Bogart was the first to do it. And then run to the other room if the guy got angry because he was not a fighter. But
See,
Bogart
that's
is a
the thing. Yeah.
complex, very complex man, and really one of the founders of the Rat Pack, which then Sinatra took over. He was a real social animal, and it just enjoyed conversation and being with people. He was quicksilver bright, and I think that's what attracted him to other people and people to him. He just was a no-nonsense person who didn't like phonies. A sort of a real life Holden Caulfield, if you will, but not sick.
Yeah, I think that's it, that he was very true. And it's the intelligence and the sensitivity with the intelligence that this book really drove that home a little bit more, that there was more of that. And I was not picking up on that before. And I also just, it's so interesting. I know this legend of the Brattle Theater in Boston and how they were playing Bogart films. What was it during finals week?
Finals week in the 1950s. It's been hard to pin down the exact dates. The Brattle
Yeah.
was my local theater when I lived in Cambridge, so that was the.
Oh, wonderful.
And yeah, there was nothing else to do if you were in Harvard, so they went to these old movies, which the theater was able to rent very cheaply because they were old movies. And Bogart just leapt off the screen at these preppies, and they began to venerate him. And it really kept on for many, many years. Although I went to the 50th anniversary screening of Casablanca at the Brattle. And long before the Rocky Horror Picture Show, you were supposed to stand up singing the Marseillaise and you're supposed to throw the lines back. Dead silence. The generations had changed so much that they didn't understand the ritual. And it was
Yeah.
almost depressing to watch Casablanca play as if it was a movie and not history.
An experience.
We tried to stand up and do the Marseillaise, and I felt like an asshole.
Sometimes you can be the only one standing up. Sometimes you just need the crowd to make it the moment. It's true.
Yeah.
But I think it's interesting though, like, are we maybe underestimating that moment a little bit? Because not only would we probably not know as much about Bogart, but it really seems like classic film existed as the fandom it is today because of that. Not alone that, but I feel like it had to have been very influential because he was kind of fading away and then he didn't. So you've got television showing these films, but perhaps people weren't as interested until the screenings in the theaters brought in a new generation.
People went to
Maybe,
the movies in those days, for one thing.
yeah,
I remember living in Washington, D.C. before I went to Massachusetts. There was a couple of theaters that just showed movies, old movies. And I remember, was it the Circle Theater, I think? I saw Grand Hotel and Dinner at Eight on a 50-foot wide screen. I mean, you can't imagine what it's like seeing Greta Garbo's face filling a screen that also fills your vision. And that's what made the movies popular.
yeah,
It's changed. Now, a lot of these films were really only on the shelf and out of release until the early 1960s when they were picked up by various distributors and sold to television, local stations mostly who had to compete with networks for programming. So it really wasn't until the generation of the 60s, which we now know as the new Hollywood generation, that even saw these movies outside of cinematheques or revival houses. The whole Warner Brothers package, which gave us Edward G. Robinson and James Cagney and Humphrey Bogart, of course, you couldn't find them anywhere. They were not on TV in the early days of television, and they appeared on television the same time that my generation began taking up movies as a hobby.
yeah. It's true, and you see it in the output. I mean, when you look at movies in the 70s, like so many of them seem to be a comment on the classics, or you can
Right.
tell that they're nerding out over these movies.
That's right. That's exactly the word. Nowadays, of course, people nerd out on the television shows of the 90s. It's not the same thing. It's like twice removed.
Yeah, it's nerding out on the nerding out. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
layers to the nerding out. Exactly. That's what that is. So, having completed this book and really examined this relationship, I mean, what do you feel like people need to know about Bogart and Houston? What's key to their story? I mean, we've covered a lot of it, but is there anything that and very well, but is there anything that you think that needs to be added?
If you're not on board, you'll never get on board, I think. It's one of those things like jazz. If you have to have it explained to you what it is, you'll never understand it. Bogart and Houston were individual people. Bogart had the image of being a rebel when he wasn't, and Houston was the rebel and tried to downplay it somewhat, although he did live on that for a while. The films that Bogart and Houston made together were simply adventures as they made them, but they were really the only times that these two people hung around together. Houston was
Yeah.
gallivanting around the world making other movies. Bogart preferred to be in Hollywood making his. And they got together not that much socially, except when they were making movies. So it's like forces coming together to create a third entity. And that's why I think the films of John Huston with Humphrey Bogart are very special and should be acknowledged. And I've tried to do that in the book.
That's so well expressed, the third entity. I think any great partnership of any kind, it's kind of that where you're making something that lives on its own.
And I also have to say that Pegasus Books, which is an imprint that goes out under Simon and Schuster, were absolutely supportive and excited about this book. And I'm happy to be with them as a publisher among the other publishers that I work with. But really, there was a special feeling there. It's a small imprint, and I think they did a really good job.
Oh, yeah, yes, absolutely. I mean, I think it's important to understand that when you have one book that's good from a place, I've done that with I have found over the years that you can definitely have your favorite publications because you find the ones that care and who really will put their hearts into something and understand that a story still needs to be told, that it's
Mm.
still important and that people are going to care. So yeah, I do appreciate that. And now, before I let you go, are you able to talk about your other project coming up?
I'm giving the publisher the protocol privilege of actually making a formal announcement.
Okay.
There is a book coming out. I've written my Hitchcock book finally after years and years of not. That'll be
Yeah.
out next year. But the most impressing one, which I happen to have a copy of here, which is just out, this is Leonard Maltin and I have written a book called Every Movie is a Miracle. That just came out as we record this a couple of days ago.
Oh,
It's
wonderful.
available from Sticking Place Books, and of course you can go online and find it through the normal places. Leonard and I have known each other for 50 years, and it never occurred to us until about a year ago to sit down and write a book together. So this is us discussing our experiences, but mostly him discussing his experiences because he's been around Hollywood so many times. And it's a talk between two old friends that happen to be about all the great movie stars and all the great movies you've ever heard of. So that is now out. And then in January of next year, and I don't have a copy because it's in the production stage now, after 35 years, I'm having reprinted my first book, which is the biography of filmmaker William Friedkin, which is called Hurricane Billy. Billy
That's
and I knew each other for 50 years, like another
yes.
situation. We were close, and he let me write his biography years ago. He still had half his life and half his films to live afterwards, but used copies were going for so much money on the internet that I wanted some of that money. And I made an arrangement with Bareback Media and Ben Omart to reprint the book and republish it. And I've added a foreword and an afterword to kind of bring it up to date. So Hurricane Billy will be out everywhere and every place in January. And then I just finished a book last night and am hoping I can get a job to do another one. I mean, this is the grind. I can't retire. I
You,
got a
you
dog to feed.
you have all this information though, like the Friedkin. I mean, you have direct connection to these people, and that's important that you share what you know. And like I said, doing the journalism, you know how to do the research and bring the story home. So it is important. And I'm really, grateful that you're out there doing this work and putting forward this
Thanks,
quality
Ken.
work. I joke with you about like that sketch on Saturday Night Live where they show Stephen King typing while he's being interviewed. And I say, that's you, how you're typing. And he goes, oh, stop, wait, writer's block. And then he just goes again. It's like, it's you. That's you, but the quality is top notch too, and that's just much appreciated. It's much appreciated, much needed. So thank you so much for that. And Nat, thank you for coming on. You're always such a delight to have on, and I really appreciate that.
Thanks, Kendall. I'll see you next year.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Cannot wait. Thank you.
Thank you.
For more information about Nat Segaloff's books, including his latest about Bogart and Huston, go to watchingclassicmovies.com. If you're enjoying the show, please rate and review wherever you listen, and thank you to everyone who has done so far. Thank you for listening. This is Kendall Krufer, watching classic movies. Until next time.